This was supposed to be a joint talk between myself and Daryl, but unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, he's unable to attend today. So I will have to sort of stretch my slides out a little bit, but we'll take it as we go. And I'll use any spare time to sort of sing the praises of all of the people on Saint Helena I've had the good fortune to work with. So the first part of the talk is with myself. My name's Danni. I'm an arachnologist. I've worked for over 15 years studying spiders, scorpions, and other arachnids worldwide, holding a variety of positions in various museums, universities, and other organisations. But less about me and more about the history of spiders on Saint Helena. So until 1977, there was very little known about the spiders. Prior to this, the two gentlemen on the top right of your screen, who are Octavius Picard Cambridge on the right and John Charles Mellis on the left, were the only people who had studied the spiders of Saint Helena. Of course, Mellis himself was a native saint, and he was working on the island on all animals and plants. What he did is he sent the spiders that he collected to Octavius Picard Cambridge, who was based in England. He was in Dorset. So the important reason for this is, of course, in these ages before that there was internet or online databases and stuff, the identification of spiders was solely done by coloration. And the only way that you could compare the coloration of your spider was to compare it with colorations written down in text by other authors. As a result, some certain authors became big specialists who would take everybody's material on board so that there was some consistency in terms of who was describing what is yellow and what is red, etc. But Mellis collected widely around the island in the cloud forest habitat, but also in the dry parts of the island. And all of these specimens were sent, as I said, to Dorset. Later, upon the death of Picard Cambridge, his collection was deposited in the Oxford University Museum of Natural History, where it is now today. And in 2022/2023, I actually recurated that collection and re-identified every specimen within it. But the big turning point, at least at the start of St. Helena's spider research, is 1977. So the Belgian expedition, of course, was 10 years prior to that. We're talking the mid-1960s. This was an expedition that was proposed by Pierre Basilewski, who is on the second row on the right there. And then all of the other arachnologists that you can see on the rest of the page are collaborators who have worked with Basilewski and the other Belgians. So there's also Narcy Leloup, who was a Belgian coleopterist, and then there's Pierre Benoit. He was the spider specialist on the group. And then all of the other collaborators are actually external collaborators from other countries who helped with the various spider research. So the real advantage that the project got in terms of the Belgian expedition is they were able to send certain spider samples to specialists on those given groups. So for instance, on the second row, you can see Doug Clark, who was a jumping spider specialist here at the Natural History Museum in London. He was the expert on jumping spiders, so he received all of the jumping spiders. Sadly, he was the only author of the 1977 monograph that didn't live to see it. He sadly passed away aged 40 in 1971. But most of the work had actually been done by the late 60s, but it wasn't published until the fourth edition of the Terrestrial Fauna of St. Helena in 1977. Since these works, which are, of course, very taxonomy-heavy works, particularly the 1977 work is all technical drawings, very little was given in terms of new research until 2022. Before this, there was sometimes a couple of lines in papers. For instance, if people were working on spiders where there was a genus that occurred on St. Helena, but they were looking at other species, they might mention in passing that there was a species on St. Helena. But really, there was no real serious work done until the Cloud Forest project. So between 2022 and 2024, the Cloud Forest project, funded by the Farm and Commonwealth and Development Office, administered by RSPB, the Species Recovery Trust, partners with the Saint Helena government, Saint Helena National Trust, etc., delivered a really cool project. And through this, I had the great fortune to obtain funding via the Species Recovery Trust and Vicky to perform a complete taxonomic revision of the spiders. So this allowed me to review all of the spiders that we had in the Natural History Museum. This also included acquisition of the Philippa Myrtle Ashmole collection, which had not yet been in a museum. I personally organised for this to be incorporated into the museum in London, and we were able to use that for most of the type specimens of our new species. The other advantage of this was that a 1-month expedition was funded through the Cloud Forest project, which meant I was able to undertake direct fieldwork. On the right, you can see two very typical and very amazing endemic hotspot habitats on St Helena. The first one at the top, of course, being Central Basin, and the second one, of course, being the top of, I think it's Action. I think it's the Action Peak, but anyway, at the top of the peaks in the globally important Cloud Forest. So this funding basically had the aim of doing two things. One is to advance our arachnological knowledge of the spiders of St Helena through the taxonomic revision that I was conducting. But the second point, and this is really, really, really crucial, is that it was capacity building, and it was an opportunity for me to exchange knowledge with on-island St Helena partners to make sure that we can help them to have an enduring, long-lasting impact on conserving the invertebrates. So 2023 is the first important year here, because this was when our first scientific paper, which had been worked through all of 2022, was published. So the first paper that was published was on the wolf spiders of St Helena. And the wolf spiders of St Helena are possibly the group with the highest endemicity of any spiders. The reason for this is every single species that occurs on St Helena, with no exceptions, is endemic. There are no invasive species of lycosid on St Helena. And indeed, as an arachnologist that's travelled to many, many countries around the world, I have never encountered another island or country that does not have invasive lycosids. So this is a really special point. Philippa Mertz-Washmole, who you can see on the top row of the photographs there, had long suspected that the wolf spiders were a really key endemic group that were massively under-recorded. They had collected quite a few samples when they were on the island for the second time in 2003. Of course, this was a time when they were doing both cloud forest work and work down on Prosperous Bay Plain with Ebb Thorpe. So they were doing a lot of just varied collecting at all different parts of the island with all different sorts of invertebrates. But they'd made a very special effort to collect wolf spiders in particular from the arid areas. And this made my research a lot easier when I came along years later. It's worth mentioning that Philip is actually originally trained as an arachnologist. So, of course, he's now known as a great general invertebrate ecologist, and also having made significant contributions to ornithology, particularly on Ascension Island. A lot of Philip's early papers were on spiders. So, as I once said in a podcast promoting the wolf spiders, there was a brilliant positive bias in terms of Philip knew exactly what to collect, exactly what a sort of specimen would be useful to a future arachnologist, which ended up being me. And we ended up with a fantastic collection sample. So in the paper that we published in 2023, we were actually able, first of all, even more significant, arguably, than new species, is new genera, so new groupings of evolutionary lineages. We found two of these. First one, Mole arachne, is of course St Helena's fantastic and famous mole spider. So its scientific name, Mole arachne sancta Heleni, quite literally is the Latin translation of the mole spider of St Helena. This was a really cool one to do because we're of course incorporating the local name for the spider into scientific perpetuity through Linnaean binomial nomenclature. The second new genus was Antembolus, which has some very particular features of the male poult. Only males have been found of these species. There's two, one we have seen in the wild since, one which was only known from Fisher's Valley, which we've never seen again. So there are concerns that it may possibly be extinct. And we've just put it in for the IUCN Red List as critically endangered, possibly extinct. In terms of the new species, we had three, and they were all really fantastic ones. So, of course, we have the mole spider, and you can see that picture in the middle there is courtesy of Philip Ashmole. That's a male. That ended up being the paratype male, which is deposited on St Helena. So any researcher that would like to see that particular paratype male can visit the Saint Helena National Trust invertebrate collections and review the paratype material. On the left of that, though, is Hogna viciensis, which is about to have its name changed to Lingzosa viciensis, which we'll talk about in the next slide. This is a fantastic species because it's restricted to just a single waterfall, Mount Vici, and that was a really cool discovery. And actually the male and female were both actually discovered by Lisa during the expedition when I was there in 2022. Also present on that trip was Martina, and we had Roger and Rosie, and we also had Eddie Duff for one of the days also, so that was great. And then the Daryl wolf spider. So I'm going to move on to Daryl's contributions in just a minute, but his contributions were so significant that I had to name a species after him. I felt so compelled that there was such a passionate local conservationist interested in spiders, and therefore I wanted to make sure that he was properly credited. So where are we now? We've just, within the last month, published the final monograph, which is a complete taxonomic revision of all spiders that have ever been found on Saint Helena. Anytime it's been mentioned in a book, anything that's been mentioned in passing, in reports, everything, every specimen in a museum has been reviewed. Through this, we were able to identify another 2 endemic species from the cloud forest, and those are Lisa's pirate spider and Natasha's pirate spider. So it was really great to be able to honour these 2 great friends and colleagues who have done so much for invertebrate conservation on Saint Helena through these species. But we also found 2 further species in the museum collections. And of course, it was very important then to tie those to the names of other Saint Helenian conservationists who were so integral to the collaboration that we did. So one eyeless species, which was found at Lot, known from a single specimen, is now called Anapistula martina. It's one of the world's smallest spiders, and it's named after Martina for her fantastic contributions to all variety of conservation projects on St. Helena. And the second new species is a small goblin spider, again a couple millimetres long, Ichnophyrus Christie Joe, named after Christie Joe Scipio-Dean, formerly an invasive invertebrate technician at the Saint Helena National Trust, who did a great deal of work on the invasive species project with Natasha. So taxonomically now, spiders are the best known invertebrate group on the island. They've gone from being a group known from only text-based descriptions and a couple technical drawings to being a group that is now completely taxonomically well known unless we find any new species. Important to remember that teamwork makes the dream work. I had such a tremendous privilege to work with so many wonderful people whilst I was on the island in a variety of organisations. But a special thanks, of course, has to go to Natasha, Lisa, Martina, the Peaks boys at ENRD, Stetson Stroud, Eddie Duff, and everybody else who was just so fantastically wonderful. So teamwork really does make the dream work. And this project would not have been possible without the fantastic collaborations that we were able to share on St. Helena. But what about the future? At this point, we were going to have Daryl speak, but unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, he can't join us today. So I'm going to try and do him justice and tell you about the research work of this very bright young man. So Daryl is an invertebrate field officer at the Saint Helena National Trust, and also alongside me and all of the other invertebrate team on Saint Helena is a member of Vicky's IUCN Atlantic Islands Invertebrate Specialist Group. He's Saint Helena's first proper local arachnologist. I mentioned Melis earlier, but he was a general naturalist who just happened to collect spiders. Daryl is the first true dedicated arachnologist that the island has. So Daryl, through funding from the Cloud Forest Project, was able to do both in-person mentoring with me and mentoring online via Zoom and via writing manuscripts over the last 2 years. This was a great way to sort of impart some of my knowledge onto Daryl and make sure that we had more of that local capacity building. So in addition to in-field research and being taught to dissect specimens and read scientific papers, I also instructed Daryl in evolutionary biology, phylogeny, molecular phylogenetics, conservation genomics, comparative anatomy, geometric morphology, etc., etc. So this training, of course, has made Daryl the first arachnologist on his island to be able to lead his own research, but also it's going to give him that capacity going down the line that he can start teaching others and now imparting his great knowledge to benefit future generations. So Daryl's current research is on the distribution, ecology, and conservation population sort of dynamics of the endemic golden sow spider, which is, of course, a unique and endemic St. Helenian species that mostly lives under leaves. When I first came to the island in 2022, I did 3 days of initial surveying just to get a baseline. And then the idea was that Daryl would then do a multi-year project to then look at the ecology properly. Through this, he's been able to do lots of site visits, and you can also see bottom left is also Lisa also helping with the surveys. So let's talk about the golden sow spider findings. So we knew very little. Like I said, I went and did 3 days of ecology work on the island with Daryl and Lisa to sort of just give them a kickstart, but we still knew very little. But from Daryl's findings, we've been able to make some really interesting conclusions about the ecology of the golden sow spider. So first of all, they are nocturnal. We were finding them in the day because we were only going then in the day. But Daryl had the opportunity with Lisa to go back at night. And going back at night showed us that the vast majority of the activity, whether that be predation, building of egg sacs and webs, is done at night. Also, we were able to further establish that it's an aranophagus species, which is relatively rare for this genus. So it can specifically bind and hunt out and eat other spiders. And indeed, actually, whilst I was there with Daryl, we found it eating invasive species, which was quite encouraging to know that though for that particular spider, the invasive species seem to be something that they can actually predate.
I need 5 minutes, please.
Okay, thanks, Drew. But in terms of other sort of behaviours, Daryl was able to find that there's actually maternal behaviour, which is relatively rare in spiders. So females stay very close to their egg sacs being quite a distinct stalk that comes down to a little white ball, much like those little things that we used to get from the joke shop that you throw on the floor and they make that popping sound. So they stay very close to their egg sacs, and they've been observed repairing them after damage in harsh weather conditions. So, for instance, if there's been heavy wind or rain and this has damaged either parts of the egg sac or the webbing around which is suspending the egg sac, Daryl has made the really interesting observation that the females go and repair that. So not only are they staying around the egg sac for general protection, they are also repairing it if it does undergo climatic damage. So probably the most important finding, though, was related to distribution. So in the 1800s, when this species was first described by Picard Cambridge based on specimens from Melis, it was known only from Diana's Peak. When the Belgians went there, they found it also in the cloud forest, but nowhere else. But now, especially given, of course, the reduction of size of the cloud forest to 16 hectares, we were really worried about the distribution of this species. But we knew there was one population just outside of the cloud forest in privately owned land. When I went there with Daryl and Lisa, I said to them that one of the cool things they could do is go to all of the other gullies around near this private land to see if the species had gone there. And that was one of Daryl's missions. Well, it was immensely successful because they were able to find populations at a variety of other sites in the lowlands outside of the cloud forest. So we now have a better understanding that this species, particularly in the lowland areas, can be more numerous as long as it's associated with certain climatic conditions. So running water being extremely close, and we're talking within 10 foot of a tree, for instance, it seems to be a really key finding. Another finding is the microhabitat. There is a so-called Goldilocks zone. So there is a temperature and humidity perfection sort of ratio. Within this ratio, you will find the very largest density. But the other finding there was that they were actually finding that instead of just under endemic plants, which is where we thought initially that they were making their webs, they have actually adapted and spread out. You can find them under ginger and under banana plants and other sort of plants with large leaves under them. So Daryl's research has really sort of pushed the envelope forwards in terms of golden sow spider, taking us from a species that was taxonomically well known because it had been reviewed by the Belgians and then by myself, but whose ecology data was extremely poor. Now, through his Saint Helena funded work, he's been able to show all of these significant results, contributing to the ecology, distribution, biogeography, and population dynamics of the golden sow spider. So there's some really fantastic work coming out of there. So yeah, a very big thank you to all of you for listening to this lecture. Also, I want to say some particular thanks and call out some particular people. So the invertebrate team on Saint Helena, what a wonderful bunch of people. Lisa Fowler, Natasha Stevens, Daryl Joshua, of course, Christy Jones, Capio O'Dean, Martina Peters, Eddie Duff, and indeed everybody else at the Saint Helena National Trust that were so welcoming and helpful to me, particularly Helena Bennett. Thanks also to Rebecca Cairnswicks, director at the Saint Helena Research Institute, who was really instrumental in making sure I got settled in on the island. Thanks also to Isabel Peters for issuing research licence for exporting specimens, which was particularly important for our wolf spider work. Thanks to Shayla and Kirsty at RSPB, who were managing the funding from FCDO for the Cloud Forest project. Huge thanks to everyone else in the Atlantic Islands Invertebrate Specialist team for all of their support when we were doing the spider red listing. Thanks to Roger and Rosie, to Stetson Stroud, to the Peaks Boys, ENRD, ANRD, SHG, and all of the other organisations that helped us on Ireland. And last but certainly not least, a massive thank you to Vicky Wilkins, who is the glue that holds us all together and made all of this work possible. So thank you all very much. I'm sorry that Daryl couldn't join us today. He would have been delighted to present his research, but I can only hope that I've done it justice. Thank you very much.